For the first entry of this iceberg, we'll be going over Stranger in the Alps by Phoebe Bridgers. Stranger in the Alps is an album filled with many sub-stories, each revolved around relationships the main characters have with their partners and the issues they have in those relationships and how they cope with that issue. For example, one song has the main character go through a breakup in which they spend their time coping by either calling a friend who makes them laugh or blacking out drunk in their car. Pretty decent listen, I'd say. However, it's not my type of music. Stratosphere. The album Stratosphere, created by Duster, doesn't have a real story, but rather it relies on creating an atmosphere for the listener, and for them to essentially interpret their own version of the quote-unquote story. It also explores one's own emotion throughout the whole experience, with the song setting up the atmosphere. Disintegration. This album made by The Cure explains and explores the slow degradation of a relationship between two people and the constant failures of how they love, despite wanting a deep and strong connection with each other. Beach Music is an album made by Alex G, in which the main story revolves around a narrator, who doesn't have a disclosed name, having an abusive relationship with a sex worker and or stripper, for getting out of a weird and reluctant relationship with a fan, where the narrator is the abuser, while the sex worker is the victim of sorts. As the worker slowly gets more and more reliant on the narrator feels guilt but continues their actions as it continues spiraling down, slowly getting hooked on a speed. The relationship becomes more strained and worse as the album continues. Blonde is an album made by Frank Ocean, which explores Frank Ocean's past and personal trauma, and how Frank finds self-identity and recognizes emotions through losing love to gain self-appreciation. Now on to Layer 2. Melancholy. Melancholy is an album made by Daniel Johann, which was an album intended to share his personal story. With depression and living with his bipolar disorder, using the album to vent his personal experiences while being depressed during the winter months. Skeleton Crew. Skeleton Crew was a band predominant in the 80s where they made two hit albums called Learn to Talk in 1984 and The Country of the Blinds in 1986. Their music was mostly inspired by left-wing politics, music genres popular at the time, and pre-recorded tapes. Sea Change. Sea Change is an album made by Beck after his ex-girlfriend, Layla Mon, had an affair, thus ending their relationship. This had caused Beck to go through a long period of emotional processing, which spanned shortly over a year. He went on to release Sea Change on September 24, 2002, which led him to peaking at number 8 on the US Billboard. Purple Mountains. Purple Mountains centers around the ideas of divorce, isolation, and death, as it was written by David Berman shortly after the death of his mother and his comeback to music after a 4-year retirement after the band Silver Jews split up. Grace. Lots of songs on Grace describe giving love to somebody and not having the same treatment returned back, or reaching for love that's not meant to happen, and basically dreaming for someone who you might not even meet. Grace also acknowledges death because it's inevitable, and when it does occur, it tends to weaken people emotionally, but also show how people can grow around it, also relating to yearning someone. Like yearning for someone who is unreachable because they've died and having the desires to connect back. DC Snuff Film / Waste Yourself. Waste Yourself is a compilation and remaster of the band Teen Suicide most sought after early works. DC Snuff Film and Waste Yourself was created by the band known as Teen Suicide, in case you didn't catch that the first time. The album revolves around self-hatred and having an emotionally avoidant partner that doesn't care about the relationship or the narrator, which is further emphasized by the more heavier and aggressive playstyle used in later songs. A Moon-Shaped Pool. A Moon-Shaped Pool is a 9th studio album released by the band Radiohead. This album centers around each of the band members' personal struggle. The album is mostly centered around Thom Yorke and his divorce with Rachel Owen. Transatlanticism. Transatlanticism, made by Death Cab for Cutie, is an album diving into the themes of long-distance relationships and the emotional isolation that comes with those types of relationships. The songs use the Atlantic Ocean as a way to emphasize the long-distance aspect of these relationships and the feeling of isolation that sometimes comes with these relationships. American 4, The Man Comes Around. American 4, The Man Comes Around is Johnny Cash's final album released before his passing, and the album serves as a testament to his life and mortality, as he is well aware of his declining health during the production of this album. Ruins. An album produced by the band First Aid Kit follows an aftermath of the relationship ending. as the album dives into self-reflection while also admiring the past relationship's beauty and for what it was. Ultimately, the album ends with the main lead finding the strength to move on. Black Star. David Bowie's Black Star album is interpreted by many as a goodbye to his fan base, as the album was released 2 days before his death, and the fact that the album dives into David's personal experiences and his own view on his own mortality. One of the more stronger pieces of evidence for this viewpoint are from one of the songs from the album dubbed Lazarus, which is solely centered around David's grappling with the concept of death and his mortality. Jar of Flies. The album produced by Alice in Chains was inspired by a childhood experiment done by Jerry Cantrell, where he kept 2 jars, both containing flies, and overfed one jar while he underfed the other jar. This was done to observe their behavior and see how they'd act under different environments. However, the album also dives into Staley's personal struggle with heroin, which resulted in a massive wave of loneliness and despair, leading to more inspiration for the album. Forever Ago. Forever Ago is an album made by Bon Iver, which explores the narrator's relationship slowly deteriorating, as their partner wastes away slowly due to their drug habit, and thus forcing the narrator to retreat in isolation as they struggle to maintain this relationship. Elliott Smith, S/T. Elliott Smith, a studio album made by American songwriter Elliott Smith, was made in early 1994 and 1995. 1995 was the same year the album was released. The album contains many lyrics referencing drug use and depression. However, it's important to note that Elliott Smith made the lyrics referencing drug use as merely as a metaphor and wasn't meant to be taken seriously. The album is known for its dark and melancholic themes, which is where it gets the S/T part from, as it reflected Elliott's personal mental health during the production of this album. Ghost Tropic. Ghost Tropic is the 5th studio album released by Songs Ohia. That's about all the info I could find on this. Closer. Closer is the second and last album released by the band Joy Division after the suicide of Ian Curtis, who was the band's lead singer and lyricist. This dealt a huge blow to the band, and as a result, quit shortly after this album's release. The album is known for having dark themes and a claustrophobic theme to it, since it explores the themes of isolation and despair in one's life. These themes are intensified due to the suicide of Ian Curtis. The album quickly became a landmark in the post-punk music genre since it pushed the boundaries of this genre at the time. Soundtracks for the Blind. Soundtracks for the Blind is an experimental album released by the band Swans in 1996. It explores the themes of mortality and mental/physical deterioration, with lead singer Michael Gira singing about his father and his blindness, and Jarbo singing about his mother with dementia. There is no real grand story in the album, but it explores multiple themes with its multiple songs. Lowercase. I couldn't find much information on lowercase. The only thing I could find was a definition for the genre of music, which I'll read off to you right now. Lowercase is a form of ambient minimalism, where the quiet sounds are increased and are put on the forefront of the song. Pink Moon. Pink Moon is the 3rd and final album released by Nick Drake, where he dropped the album in the UK in 1972. The album was about Nick Drake's personal life and his struggles with depression, in which he unfortunately lost 2 years later in 1974, thanks to overdosing on 30 antidepressant pills. Pink Moon is a short collection of songs consisting of Nick's voice, acoustic guitars, and a piano being the only source of sound in his album. It was received poorly, much like every other album he made at the time. And that about wraps up this iceberg chart. If you guys like this video, make sure to leave a like, subscribe, and leave a comment if you want to. This is part 1 of the chart. I'm going to finish up the rest of the parts. This is more of just testing the waters to see if YouTube would like this, since most of my viewers are from short content, right? Like short form content, edits and stuff like that. So it's more so to see if the algorithm likes it and stuff like that. So it's more of a test, which is why I split it up into 2 parts, since I didn't want to focus too much time onto this, since it would take away from other projects. Now, that being stated, this is also my first long-form video in a while, so it's probably a little bit bad, and I am sorry for that. And I will work on improving the quality of the videos in the future. That being said, have a good day, take care of yourself,